Audiobook. The World of the American Pit Bull Terrier. By Richard Stratton. Part 3. Chapter 3. The Natural History of the Absurd.
Humanist society and animal control groups are, to the general public, one and the same. In reality, it's not that simple. There are various animal welfare groups, and there are different organizational services for animal control operations, as well. The easiest way to keep these somewhat separate groups is to remember that the goal of animal welfare groups is to protect animals from people, while the goal of animal control is to protect the public from animals and their annoyances. Generally, animal control is financed by the municipality or city, while the various human groups depend on private donations. With so many animal welfare groups, it's impossible to name them all, but I thought I'd take the time to pick a few for you. Reportedly, the first animal welfare organization was the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, created in Britain in 1824 by the Reverend Arthur Boone. Later, in 1866, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals was created in New York. Obviously, there was enough money coming in that the American Humanist Association was founded around 1870. A new organization called the National Humanist Association was promptly sued by the American Humanist Association for name similarity, so the name was changed to the Humanist Society of the United States. There are many other animal welfare groups, too, but delineating them all will be an unnecessary tedious exercise. When I was a boy in Colorado, there was a heavily painted picture of a fat woman who used to ride her horse in front of our house every day. In exactly what capacity, I'm not sure, but she was linked in some way with the local humanist society. One of the reasons I remember this is because the running joke was that there was no one crueler to animals than she was to her horse for riding it. The city's situation with the Humanist Society was one of those instances where the difference between the Humanist Society and the Animal Control Society was considerably strained by the fact that the Humanist Society was commissioned to run an animal transport and control service. Indeed, Humanist Society kennels were even rented out to the public as dog hotels. Although animal control services are sometimes contracted out to human groups, they are usually separate. In fact, different human groups have taken animal control organizations to court for cruelty to them. To be honest, grand juries have also nominated humanist societies for the same charge. Sometimes different animal welfare groups clash, accusing each other of cruelty, usually with respect to the shelter keeping the animals penned up or the method of euthanasia used. Now, admitting that human groups have more than their share of chips, we must also recognize that many decent and sincere people are involved in the movement. Although we think of bull terrier breeders locked in mortal combat with humanists, such is not always the case. For example, Bloodline's journal, in its old pro-dogfighting days, went hand in hand with humanist groups against vivisectionists. Cynics, I suppose, will conclude that the pit bull breeders were merely trying to help their image. The truth, however, is that pit bull breeders are no less animal lovers than humanists. Anyway, humanist societies in general have done a tremendous job with the image. Indeed, the impression with the general public is that they are a government agency. Of course, they had an easy job in that regard because they had everything going for them. Despite everything, almost everyone loved animals and is against cruelty to them. However, were the humanist groups really so good and so affectionate? I have my doubts. And I am very concerned about your general tendencies to favor extremely oppressive legislation. I also resent the fact that they ignore the plight of wildlife whose habitat is constantly being destroyed by the population of good old Homo sapiens. Humanist groups have rightly been at the forefront of advocating for the sterilization of domestic animals to curb the population explosion. If they care about all animals, for example wildlife, shouldn't they also keep the human population in check? While I feel there should be general anti-cruelty laws, I have some sincere doubts about how effective the legislation is on animal cruelty. After all, the most common cruelty is simply neglect, and few people see it. In any case, the most effective force for anti-cruelty is pressure, and I think people have always been concerned about animals and have used various measures of persuasion to get their friends to take care of their animals. This attitude of respect and care for animals is reflected even in ancient writings. Anyway, certain things seem to have an impetus on themselves. Legislation does not eliminate, or even has little effect on, cruelty, and humanistic societies have only managed to have legislation against the sports of the common man or the little known. They have been singularly ineffective against any cruelty that has to do with fattening our stomachs. Readers may be interested in the sociological circumstances that accompanied the growth of humanist groups and the subsequent legislation that resulted. Do you remember that it was Reverend Boone who founded the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals? Well, the Church was antagonistic to many animal sports but not always for the reason you might think. This was during an age of protection from the denial of the pleasures of this world. In this way, animal sports were antagonized more by the pleasure given to viewers than by any presumed suffering on the part of the animals. This denial of worldly pleasure pervaded many religions at the time, and some clergy were scandalized when the secret of their chess games was discovered. Henry Bergh, who founded the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in the United States, has been variously described as a fop and a phony. He wore spats and a top hat, and he was obviously vocal about the cruelty of animals. However, he did not stop eating meat out of custom, but he did at least push for a more humane slaughter. His compassion had its limits, as he favored pillorying those who were cruel to animals. He was also in favor of the death penalty. Based in New York, he traveled extensively across the country, lecturing and leaving an overabundance of SPCA. My first memory of information about one of the humanist societies was when I was 14, and the information was about a dog ring that was supposedly raided by police in New York City. According to the news, a number of sophisticated New Yorkers were attending the event, and not only were they taken aback and embarrassed by a night in jail, but they were also nauseated by the sight of a bull terrier leisurely chewing on the leg of the other. Well, even at that young age, I knew enough about pit bulls and their fights to know that this story was pretty unusual and couldn't possibly be true. The legs are surprisingly solid, and furthermore, a dog would not allow its opponent to stand on its leg for so long, usually snapping it off by biting its muzzle. I would later learn that the veracity of these reports by aid agencies was questionable to say the least. Incidentally, the article was illustrated by a photograph of an American Kennel Club white bull terrier. My next revelation was of a lauded review of an upcoming dogfighting movie starring Joe E. Brown. I don't remember the name of the movie, but the magazine warned that pit dog owners wouldn't like it because it revealed the so-called sport for what it really was. At the time, I worked at a movie theater as a placeholder and after-school usher, so I saw this pompous film several times. The movie was so cloying and misleading that I'll spare the reader the plot, but it did involve a fighting dog trainer and one arena dog in particular. Just to show you how authentic the movie was, the arena dog was a boxer. And the arena dog trainer's training method was to whip the dog with a bullwhip, to make it ferocious. The Humanist Society had no reservations in applauding its authenticity. The real rubbish about pit dog activities started to take flight in the early 1970s. That's when stories using puppies and kittens as lures to train a pit dog started to surface. All the other nonsense about prostitution, drugs, and violence that was part of the arena dog scene gained new prominent coverage about this time, too. Why such a lie? Can't an honest argument be made against dog fighting based on the truth? The big question for me was, where did the stories start? Were they a figment of some overactive humanist's imagination? To be honest, and I'm always being partial to seeing the other side of the view, a Chicago reporter supposedly got an interview with a supposed dogfighting promoter who spoke of using kittens in onion bags as bait for fighting dogs. He even talked about clipping the kittens' nails so they wouldn't hurt or discourage the arena dogs. You have to meet these dogs to appreciate how ridiculous this story is. Here you have dogs that will kill a porcupine, absolutely disdaining the thorn, and yet we have to cut the kitten's nails so that the dogs are not afraid to attack them. At this point, I'll digress for just a moment to talk about the characteristics of pit bulls that make the story of puppies and kittens as bait more absurd. A friend of mine once bred different types of mastiff but converted to the pit bull. However, he retained a favorite mastiff. Over the course of several years, he'd had 3 or 4 bulldogs let loose, and each time they'd just run past other pit bulls to grab, and manhandle, the mastiff. Since he wasn't understanding what was going on, I explained to him that since the mastiff was such a huge brute, he represented a super stimulus that bulldogs could not resist. While it is true that some bulldogs will kill puppies and kittens, and so will dogs of other breeds, most of them will not. I have been in more than one breeder's kennel where puppies were allowed to run wild and where they ran back and forth within reach of champions who merely played with them or tolerated their abuse grudgingly. This is because most pit bulldogs are stimulated by larger dogs and other animals. Now, to be honest, many bulldogs will go after anything that isn't human. That's exactly their ancient hunting heritage, but if any animal has immunity, so will puppies and kittens. One night I was talking to a legitimate dog breeder who told me that he would have nothing to do with a dog that killed puppies or kittens, as he considered it a weakness, even a symptom of cowardice. In most cases, I'm afraid, our humanists made up their own scare stories or, rather, they used isolated examples and made it sound as if they were representatives of all competitions. This doesn't seem like humanists trying to be sure their stories were true. The nonsense about prostitution and drugs was obviously a cynical attempt to trick law enforcement officials into taking dogfighting more seriously. The truth of the matter is that drug dealers and prostitutes are no more a part of the dog scene than they would be in a baseball game. This is not to say that no prostitutes or dealers have ever been present at a dog show, or a baseball league, but it is certainly not representative. However, armed with their stories of stealing the dogs, puppies, and kittens for training the arena dogs, along with the stories of prostitution and drugs, and even more ridiculous stories about such things as the use of electroshock devices to provoke dogs to fight and disembowel dogs whose handlers characteristically wouldn't even mercifully put them down with a shot to the head. Humanist groups were able to enforce a law making dog fighting a crime in California. Later they followed what I call absurd crime proliferation in various states. In each case, the approach was the same story we told earlier was told, to which was added that certain states had very effective laws. This was misinformation because severe is not necessarily the same thing as effective. Each state was assured that it was the center of dog fighting in America, and wasn't that a shameful honor? Much media controversy preceded any attempt at legislation. In some states, sentences of more than 10 years in prison have been established. Shadows of Henry Berg and his pillory. One thing all laws have in common, however, they were all equally useless. There are few people I know who love animals and are more devoted to them than I am. My wife would be one of them, and my father's wife, my stepmother, would be another I might suddenly think of. If I am such a sentimental animal lover, should be able to communicate on more or less the same level as humanists, but somehow I doubt this is possible. If this were possible, and humanists would be just as willing and make the same effort as I do to see the other side's point of view, I would like to point out that their efforts have been greatly counterproductive if they have the well-being of others. Arena dogs in mind. Even if they're thinking about other animals and don't care about our dogs, your supply of absurd stories has been detrimental to them, too, as your bait stories have inspired certain low-level newcomers to the breed to get into this sort of thing. Their stories, however, become self-fulfilling to a certain extent. If humanist groups are really interested in the welfare of dogs, they should work towards the legalization, and regulation, of dog fighting. That way they can make a contribution towards improving animal welfare instead of making it worse, as they have done in the past, with their efforts to stop it, but they will never stop, so why not make it better, to stop it? The welfare of the animal. There's a moral to every story if you just look for it. Lewis Carroll.
This was the third part of the audiobook. The World of the American Pit Bull Terrier. By Richard Stratton. My name is Rodolpho Luiz, and I invite everyone to enjoy the knowledge of this wonderful breed. Subscribe so you don't miss the next video. God bless you all. I went.